All right, so we're live.
Well, we are going live. It will show me when it is there. And it says it's now streaming live on Facebook, but we'll give it a minute to see other folks join us. I don't see it yet here on the interwebs. There it is. Just always takes a minute, so you gotta just wait and see who joins us.
I'm just impressed you know how to do all this.
You know, COVID. Seriously, some benefits of the last year. I just learned how to do so many things that I was looking back at my year in review, right? And I was like, I learned how to do a fair number of new things this year. And I don't know that I'm an expert in them by any stretch of any means, but at least I know fundamentally how to do it. And clients are just meeting with me on Zoom all the time, and it's so fun that at least we can still see each other face to face.
Exactly.
You know? So
good
stuff. Well, here we are. We are live, guys. We are back for Mortgages and Mindset. We are bringing Mortgages and Mindset back once a month on the third Monday of the month at 5 Pacific, 7 Central. So make sure you join us on our Monday Mortgages and Mindset. Today, I get the great pleasure of introducing Kelly Myers, who works together. We work together with the Vesta Divorce Group, which is a collaborative group. Kelly is a divorce coach, and her company is Your Divorce Advocate. We're going to talk today about some things that I think kind of apply universally. We were talking earlier about how some of the stuff Kelly talks about regularly, I'm like, that is just great coaching in general for whatever life thing you might be going through. But particularly if you are going through a divorce, you have been through a divorce and you're dealing with post-divorce stuff, or you know somebody who's going through a divorce or has been through one and is challenged, Kelly is an excellent resource. So with that being said, I'm willing to bet that there are people listening that go, a divorce coach? Really? What in the world does a divorce coach do? So Kelly, I'm going to let you kind of kick off with that. Like, what does a divorce coach do anyway?
Okay, well, first of all, thank you for that fabulous introduction. Hopefully I can live up to that. A divorce coach really does, it's really different for every person out there. It's unique to every person who's going through a divorce. For some people, I help them navigate the divorce process itself and understand the different steps that they should take so that they can become their own advocate in the divorce process. For some people, it's helping them prepare for various stages of their divorce, to help them prepare for their mediation sessions, to understand, to be very clear on what their priorities are and what's important to them so that they can not have fear going into those sessions and can be very clear on what it is that they want. For some, it's working to put together a parenting plan so that they can really focus on their children, put their children first, and come together to create a roadmap for how they're going to interact together, moving forward as co-parents. Sometimes it's helping people learn how to communicate better during the divorce process and after, particularly if there's a co-parenting situation, because it's usually the communication or miscommunication that throws things into conflict and takes things off of a productive path and down into a ditch. And so we will work on that as well.
Yeah. I know that in our group, so Kelly and I work together and do with a larger group of people who do presentations for those that are going through divorce in small private group settings. We're not doing those on Facebook Live, so that people have the ability to ask questions, et cetera. And one of the main things that almost always comes up when we're talking with attorneys is that spending time with somebody like you on the front end can really help save a ton of money and time, and maybe combative type conversation with an attorney involved. Can you talk a little bit more about that and what your suggestions for that are?
Absolutely. Well, what I can tell you is I'll bring you back to 2012 when I was going through my divorce. And I think that for some people, when they're going through a divorce, there's hurt feelings, and there's a feeling of I want to feel validated for the wrongs that I feel were committed, or the hurt that I feel, and I want to get what is owed me. There's a lot of different feelings that go on. And the benefit of working with somebody like myself, a divorce coach or a therapist, is to have a little to work through those feelings outside of the legal process, and quite frankly, outside of having to spend $350+ an hour. Um, and the thing that is really important to understand is that when it comes to divorce, it's really a business transaction. And so the emotion, I always say that the person who comes to the table with the least amount of emotion and the most amount of knowledge tends to be the one that walks away um, with an agreement, or that they can move on from and thrive, if you will. They may not be perfect, and it may not be exactly what they wanted, but they're able to move on and thrive. Um, and attorneys aren't typically trained to manage our emotions, and so it's really important to work with somebody. If you have a lot of emotions, a lot of deep-seated hurt, a therapist is probably best for that. As a divorce coach, it's really important. I spend my time with people, not that I won't hear things that are emotional and things that have happened, but it's really important. I try to keep people moving forward and focused forward. I use the analogy, you've heard me talk about this a lot, a book, right? And that when you decide to get divorced, you're closing the book on that part of your life. And you get this wonderful opportunity to write a whole new book.
Right.
And, every day, every hour, every minute is your opportunity to write a chapter, a page, a word. And every moment you spend rereading that book that you closed is time taken away from being able to write your new book. So as a divorce coach, although it's often important for people to share different emotions with me, I really try to keep them moving forward. And okay, what do we do with that? I also, as a divorce coach, try to get people to understand the realities of the situation. I'm not an attorney, but I do have, enough experience around it to be able to raise a red flag, to encourage my client to seek, legal counsel or financial counsel, to understand what would legally, where would the courts fall on this? Because I think very often people have this mindset of what is, and it really isn't.
Right.
And so that's some ways that I can help my clients, is to be able to kind of raise the red flag and say, you might want to consider getting some counsel on that, because it may change your perspective.
Yeah, both on the positive side and the negative side of that,
Exactly.
right? I mean, you might be in a situation where you're like, hey, that's something you could check out because I think this might benefit you. And on the other side of that, hey, I don't think this line of thinking is accurate, and you might want to just get some legal input into that.
Exactly.
And I have, unfortunately, and I know we talk about this, it's not like divorce is happening. It's not like we encourage divorce. Right?
No.
Hey, this is not what that's all about, but divorce is happening. It's happening all around us. We don't have to, look far to encounter somebody who is going through it, gone through it, or going to be going through it. And one of the things that I hear you say frequently around the emotions is, and I appreciate that you said it's a business transaction, right? Mm-hmm. Ultimately, when it all boils down, we're talking about separating assets and income and property and all of that. None of the most states, there's not a whole lot of entering in all of that emotion, entering into things.
Correct.
Right. So you talk about when you're communicating, and this is something that I think it can be helpful no matter who you're talking to, whether it's a business relationship or a friend or your ex-spouse, whomever, where there's conflict. You talk about a BIF statement. Want to explain what that is?
Okay, BIF statement is, or a BIF response statement, however you want it, is something that is a response that is brief, the B. And by brief, it's 3 to 4 sentences. It's not very long. It doesn't need to be long. It's informative, which means that it is just straight information. There's no opinions. There's no emotion. There's no advice. It's fact-based, straight information. It's friendly. You know, you try to open with a friendly close, or to express some empathy for others' concern, you know, and the instance of a co-parenting situation, it could be, you know, I appreciate your concern for little Johnny, you know, or it means a lot that this was concerning to you, you know, something to that. And then, you know, you want a positive close. And then the firm part of it is you want to close the door to further communication, because you don't want to get into a cycle of unproductive and ineffective communication. So you want to shut it down by offering, you know, 2 options to a close. If it's a discussion around how you're going to handle something, offer options, and then you want to provide a deadline for response. So you want to be firm in how you close out the conversation, because again, what you're trying to do is not perpetuate,
Right.
you know, unproductive communication.
So can you give an example of what that might look like in a firm close with the options? I assume.
You know, it just would be, you know, let's say it's, I really wanted to have, I want to take little Johnny to, I get an email. I really want to take little Johnny to the baseball game, but you know, you never let me take him because he's got school, but I think it's important he spend time with dad. Da, 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 da. Okay. You know, so it's, you know, dear John, I received your, you know, your request to take Johnny to the baseball game. I really appreciate your desire to want to spend time with your son. I think that's important.
Yeah.
Leave it there. And then it's, um, I, I think going to the baseball game would be good for him. Could you look to see if there is a game on Saturday that he could go to, Saturday or Sunday, so that it doesn't disrupt his schooling? You know, please let me know by such and such a date,
Sure.
you know, so that I can plan whether or not, you know, plan whether or not he's going to go with you to the game. It's a little disjointed, but it gives you kind of an idea.
I put you on the spot with that. That's totally my, like, put you on the spot. But what I heard was be brief, informative, friendly, firm.
Yes.
And give options, because who doesn't like options? Nobody likes being told what to do. So at least if you give a couple options, that gives choices, and give a deadline for response.
And if you notice, I caught myself there on the friendly part of it. And I wish I could remember exactly what I said, but I started to give an opinion and about my emotion. Like I started to talk about my emotion, and I stepped back from that, because you want to keep your emotion, and you want to give as little space as possible for somebody to come back at you. And I will tell you, I used to be so unproductive in my communication with my ex. I would write, I mean, pages and paragraphs of emails. And what I did a lot of times was try to correct the record, if you will. And I had to learn, and you and I have talked about this, just because somebody says it doesn't make it true. Okay, you know, he's entitled to his opinion, as I am. And I don't have to correct the record. I don't have to, you know, tell him where he's wrong.
Right.
And I don't always have to respond. That's the other thing that's important, is that response is not always necessary. If somebody's just venting, there really isn't a need to respond. So it's understanding, you know, what type of communication is important, when it's important to respond, how to respond. Again, so that you're not getting yourself into situations that just enhances conflict.
Well, and having been through divorce myself, and you know, I think about, let's remove emotion from divorce, and that's like next to impossible. Those are lessons. This is the most important relationship of your life. You've been with, nobody goes into marriage thinking, oh, let's go into marriage thinking we're good. There's a whole lot tied in. You got kids in there, other people's opinions in there, all sorts of stuff mount. So we talk often about the fact that, and I know I tie it to mortgage as well, because it seems quite often that people are doing a couple of the top 5 most stressful things at the same time as
Mhm.
buying a house, right?
Yes.
Financing a house. They're like getting married and buying a house. They're having a baby and, buying a house, getting divorced and buying a house. Somebody dies, they're moving.
Right.
Like those are moving on its own. Buying a
Mhm.
house on its own is one of the most stressful things, top 5. And they talk about that because, like, it is, there's a lot wrapped up in your home, right? It's
Absolutely.
not just a roof over your head. There's all sorts of memories and building and, measuring kids on walls and all that stuff that goes on inside a home. And now we're having to make a change at the same time with our house and this relationship that was this most important relationship in our life. Talk a little bit about your experience with that, and what maybe would have been different if you had somebody like you or myself or the team that we have
Mhm.
invested in your world when it came to housing.
Well, what I would say is, to your point, emotion is just it's a given in divorce, right? So you can't take it out.
Right.
What you can do is really the only person you can control is you, right? So it's if you have a lot of emotion around it, you have to learn how to communicate and the venues to communicate. So maybe phone calls aren't the best, ways to communicate. Maybe, in person isn't the best. Maybe it is limiting it to email or text, and that gives you the opportunity to step back, reread, maybe have somebody else read, and really edit what it is that you're saying. Take some time. Time is the best thing that you can take in an emotional situation before you respond. And that's as you and I know, even with kids, right? It's taking that breath, right? Stepping back is the best thing you can do. um I think, for me, looking back on my divorce, I spent a lot of time being really emotional because I was scared,
Mhm.
because I didn't know what I didn't know, and I didn't even know how to go about it. And it's one of the things I think you and I both really appreciate about Vesta is that d- it's the idea of you need to have a team to help you through this process. I think I've shared with you that when I got divorced, I decided I didn't want the marital home. And one of the reasons why I decided that was because I remember, and I don't know if it was a movie that I saw or it was an article I read at some point, but I remember somebody saying one of the biggest mistakes, and this may not be correct, you'll know this, but one of the biggest mistakes that particularly a woman can make, particularly if she's been a stay-at-home mom, which I was to take the family home, because typically it's very expensive, and they're so emotionally attached to this home that they feel they have to have it, and they do themselves a disservice in that process. Um, and I think a lot of that is tied up in, oh, I don't want to disrupt my children. And what I will say on that front, just as a little bit of a side note, is my children had said to me, the house I moved into, which was significantly smaller than our marital home, like half the size, less than half the size, my kids said to me it was their favorite house.
Mhm.
So that's important to know, I think, for everybody, because I think, we get really scared that, oh, our kids are, but they loved that house.
Yeah.
Um, but the other thing that I didn't even contemplate when it came to what I was going to do living wise, once I decided that I didn't want the house, I just figured, well, I'll just buy a house.
Right.
Right. Well, nobody, like it was like a slap in the face when somebody said, well, you don't have a job, so you can't qualify. And my, soon to be ex-husband wasn't going to co-sign for me, and I didn't have anybody else to co-sign for me.
Mhm.
And I was like, what? And these are things that, again, when you work with a divorce coach, these are things that they kind of give you a heads up on, so that they can work with somebody like you. I send my clients to you to have an understanding of, can you qualify, right? Because if they can't, then they may need to look at the option of keeping the family home to see if that is a viable option for them. But at least if it's not, they can very early on deal with then what is plan B? And a plan B is we have to rent. Okay. But you are being able to process the emotions around this, not in the heat of the moment of mediation or litigation, because you've got your team together.
Well, and there's nothing like a major emotional upheaval of finding out after the fact that you don't qualify, or that you can't,
Absolutely.
like when you went into it with the belief that this was going to be the case. And I've sat on the opposite side
Mhm.
of that desk a lot of times over 25 years, saying to people, well, unfortunately, credit's not quite here, and we're going to take X amount of time to do this. Or child support and alimony is something that we talk about, or spousal maintenance that we talk about regularly. People think instantly, well, the minute that it's signed, I can use that in qualifying. And there are different guidelines for different programs that don't necessarily let that be the case. And so,
And that is why it's so important to work with, people will say, well, I don't need a mortgage person yet because I'm not there. Well, no, you kind of do, because if you are working with your soon to be ex, on this process, there may be a way that he or she can start providing support,
right.
so that there's a record of it earlier in the process, so you're not waiting till the day you sign those papers and now you got another 6 months. So it is vital that even the people you don't think need to be on your team immediately, that you touch base with them in the very beginning. And if they say no, you're good, you don't need me till towards the end, at least you know that, and it's one piece. It's also important, I know I'm rambling, but it's also important, I think, from again, that idea of coming to the table with the most knowledge and the least amount of emotion.
I just wrote that down. I'm like, it helps with the knowledge bank.
It does, because what happens is, a lot of times in the divorce process, people it's blows, low blows, and it's particularly the person maybe who has been left is the one who wants to hurt and wants to say, you're not going to get this, or you're not going to get this. And the more knowledge you have, right, it gives you the ability to say that mantra in your head. Just because he or she says it's true, or says it, does not make it true. And I know that it's not true because I've consulted with my team who have given me different information. um so again, it's just, I cannot impress upon people enough that the mortgage support and the real estate support are really important to have in the beginning.
Yeah. A lot of people aren't in a, I mean, we work with people all month long that, some are, who knows, maybe you can refinance and stay in the marital
Mhm.
home. Maybe you need to go buy a new one, but just knowing where you
Exactly.
stand and what that, I mean, it's probably more than half the battle, honestly. Knowing puts you in such a greater position than the absence of that knowledge.
Well, and the reality of it is that where you live is the most, I mean, it really is one of the most important things, right? And so if you have that fear alleviated, because you may not exactly have bought the home that you're going to, but you know what your plan is, and it's just implementing your plan, and you've got your team right there that will help you implement. I think it's critical. And I look at the way I got divorced, and I mean, I didn't prepare for the conversation, and that is one thing I would tell people that's really important, is usually how you introduce the idea of divorce can have a tremendous impact on how the divorce proceeds. Because if you introduce it in a way where it creates a lot of conflict, that can hold over. So it's understanding, how do you introduce this? Part of not having conflict in how you introduce it is doing your homework ahead of time, so that you're meeting with the mortgage person, the real estate person, the certified divorce financial analyst, and your legal, team, prior to even introducing the idea of divorce, to your spouse. Um, so there's just a lot. I never did that. I didn't have an independent evaluation of what my house was worth, and that caused me a lot of trouble. I didn't have a certified financial advisor to help me, and I can't. even today, with all the work I have done, it still makes me sick over the things that I gave up. Um, there's just a lot of things that you need to know, and it's unfortunate because I think typically people enter into divorce without doing any homework, and it's probably the most important contract you'll
Right.
ever sign in your life.
Yeah. Well, and the reality of that, though, is that I didn't know, and I didn't even know until I joined Vesta as a professional, that there was a collaborative network like that existed
Mhm.
in order to help people navigate. You can't possibly know it all. It's like me from a mortgage perspective. I rely upon real estate agents. Yes, I've been in the mortgage business for 25 plus years. I know a whole lot about real estate, but I'm not going to go out and represent myself in a real estate transaction. I'm going to have a real estate agent walking alongside me. I would suggest that if I'm going to do it myself after 25 years in the mortgage business, I would obviously suggest that to any client, right?
Exactly.
Same thing applies while going through a divorce situation. You don't know what you don't know, and having a collaborative group of professionals helps educate you every step of the way. We've got a few minutes left, and I know there's something that is, I mean, you mentioned kids multiple times. I know I did too. And I also know that having been divorced and going through co-parenting and co-parenting time and co-parenting agreements, there were no real co-parenting agreements in my divorce situation.
Right. Right.
But I know it's a rightly so a really important part of the process to do well. Can you
Yes.
give what your top wisdom around that might be as people are maybe dealing with that even post divorce? Because I think that's probably the hottest thing we talk about, right? Is post decree matters with kids.
It tends to be the thing that causes the most amount of conflict, and it tends to be something that sends people back, to court, or to relitigate things. Um, I know that occurred in my situation, so I think it is vital. And what it's called is a parenting plan. And the way I look at that is it really is your roadmap to co-parenting with your children's other parents, until well, really forever. And what I usually start that when I work with people to create a parenting plan, the thing that I start with is, what legacy do you want to leave your kids with regards to your divorce? And typically people don't, they really want to minimize the impact of the divorce on their kids. And so what I say is, well, then you need to plan, and you need to take the time right now to talk about, who's going to be responsible for dentist appointments? Who's going to be responsible for medical appointments? Now, that seems silly, but what happens is everybody's busy. I'm working, my ex-husband's working, and one partner thinks the other person should take it on, or not even consciously, they just kind of let the other partner do that. And that's where conflict starts to rise.
Mm-hmm.
Who's responsible for the kids while they're at school during the school day? Is it the person who dropped them at school, or is it the person who's getting them after school? How are you going to do holidays? I will tell you, the one word that I do not use at all is flexible. We will be flexible over the holidays. We will be flexible for Christmas. I think it is very important to have a spirit of flexibility in your parenting plan, but it is more important to have a really detailed parenting plan. Dad gets kids Christmas Day, mom gets kids Christmas Eve, or, first part of the break, second part. You can always change it up and be flexible in the moment, but if you're not communicating well and you need to refer to something to get you back on track, you've got your parenting plan. So I think it's critical.
Yeah. Be specific as
Very specific.
and then bend where
It
you.
is appropriate. But what you'll find is people are really flexible until there's another party involved, until one or the other one either is dating somebody or is remarried. And then the flexibility can sometimes go away, which is
Yeah.
which is another really important thing to address. And nobody wants to address the issue of how you're going to introduce, a significant other to the children. Are they allowed to go to parent teacher conferences? Are they allowed to go to sporting events? Now, a lot of these things are not, you're not going to go to court to, because they didn't do what they said they would.
She came to the soccer game,
Right. But it really, it creates a wonderful platform to be able to talk through all these difficult things and to try to come to some understanding. And even if, it changes down the road, if I knew that it was going to be really upsetting for my ex-husband to have, my current husband at, the kids parent teacher conference or at a sporting event, that may not mean he won't come, right? But it may mean that what it will encourage me to do is have a conversation with my ex-husband and say, I know that this is, that this is may be hurtful to you. That's not why I'm doing it. But we've been together now for a couple of years, and my husband is engaged in the kids, and he wants to be there to support the kids. Is that something we can do? So it really allows you, hopefully, to stay on a positive track as you co-parent together.
I love it and appreciate it entirely. I can see where that could have come in handy as my now adult children are all grown and gone. But
yeah.
I wonder, is there anything else as we are here at the end of our time tonight? Is there anything that you haven't mentioned that you think our listeners should hear about going through divorce?
I think the thing comes back to the legacy question when it comes to your kids. If you have children and you're going through divorce, I think the thing you have to ask yourself is, do you want to build a brick wall with the things that you say, or do you want to build a brick foundation for them? And you build a brick wall by, saying negative things about their other parent, not being supportive, creating conflict. Those can create brick walls. You want to create a brick foundation for your children, and you can do that. And understand that the way you handle this divorce is going to have an impact on them that will last even to when they're getting married or they're having their kids. Because do you want to leave with them this concern, oh, are mom and dad going to be able to be in the same room together? Or is it too traumatizing for them? Even maybe you two have made up, but they just remember all the ugliness and they don't want to be together with you. So if, as much as possible, keep your children in the middle of it, but in a positive way, not in a way that you put them in the middle and they're your message takers and all of that, but keep their little hearts in the middle of all of your decisions. Because I have found that if you keep their little hearts in the middle of it all, you will tend to make the decision that is really best for everybody.
Better decisions.
Yeah.
Well, Kelly, thank you for
being
with us tonight. I'm going to put your contact information in the comments.
Okay.
So if anybody is in need or knows somebody who is, I know Kelly is an excellent advocate. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a great night, everybody.
Bye.